June 1462. The Ottoman Imperial Archives, Constantinople. A clerk is cataloging documents captured during the Wallachian campaign. Standard procedure: letters, military orders, supply manifests. Then he opens a leather case marked with Vlad Dracula's seal. Inside, 3 pages of parchment. The writing is clear, precise, in medieval Romanian with Turkish annotations. But something's wrong with the ink. It's brown, rusty, and when the clerk touches it, it flakes. He calls his supervisor. They examine the pages under lamplight, and they realize, this isn't ink. This is blood, human blood, dried, preserved, 560 years old. Chemical analysis conducted in 2019 by the University of Bucharest confirmed what Ottoman archivists suspected in 1462. The letter was written in blood from at least 17 different people. Type O negative, A positive, B positive, mixed, deliberately mixed. The letter is addressed to Sultan Mehmed II, dated May 1462. 1 month before the main Ottoman invasion, 1 month before the forest. It's 3 pages long, 847 words, and it describes in precise architectural detail what Vlad is building along the road to Targovishte. But here's what historians missed for 5 centuries, what nobody understood until Dr. Elena Constantinescu applied forensic linguistic analysis in 2019. The letter wasn't just describing the forest. The letter was the cipher, the key, the instruction manual for how to read what Vlad had built. Each paragraph of the letter corresponds to a specific section of the display. Each sentence maps to a particular arrangement of bodies. Each word choice indicates a category of victim and their strategic purpose. Vlad didn't just build a forest of death. He wrote a message in human flesh, and then sent a letter explaining exactly how to interpret it. The letter has been in the Ottoman Imperial Archives for 500 years, partially translated, mostly ignored, dismissed as the ravings of a madman. Until 2019, when Dr. Constantinescu realized that the letter's structure matched Ottoman military intelligence reports about the forest's layout, that the blood on the pages contained genetic markers matching remains found at the Targovishte site, that this wasn't madness. This was communication. This was statecraft. This was a ruler who understood that terror only works if the message is understood. Today, you're going to see the full translation. Every paragraph, every instruction, every hidden layer of meaning that Vlad encoded into 20,000 deaths. This is the letter Vlad wrote in blood, and this is what it actually says. Before we read the letter, before we decode what Vlad was communicating and why it worked, I need you to do 2 things right now. First, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell, because what you're about to see is restricted historical evidence. The full translation of this letter has never been published for general audiences. Academic journals only. Limited circulation. Classified by the Romanian government as too politically sensitive. YouTube's algorithm will bury this video. They'll demonetize it. They'll mark it as not advertiser-friendly. Because it's about systematic violence. Because it's about psychological warfare. Because it's about how power actually works. So if you want access to documents like this, if you want to see what archives hide and what governments classify, you need to force YouTube to show you this content. Subscribe now. Second, like this video, right now, before you hear the translation. Because the like tells YouTube this matters. That people want evidence-based history. That primary source documents deserve to be read and analyzed and understood. Every like fights the algorithm. Every like makes it possible for us to continue translating restricted historical materials. Now, let's read the letter. Let's decode what Vlad wrote. And let's understand why this letter, more than any battle, more than any army, changed the course of the Ottoman invasion. The letter begins with a formal address, standard diplomatic protocol. But the language is already strange. It reads, "To Mehmed II, Sultan of the Ottomans, conqueror of Constantinople, shadow of God on earth. From Vlad III, voivode of Wallachia, son of the dragon, keeper of the pass. I write to you in the ink of sovereignty, drawn from those who thought to serve two masters." Ink of sovereignty? That's the first clue. Vlad isn't using metaphor, he's being literal. The ink is blood, the sovereignty is his. And the phrase, drawn from those who thought to serve two masters, identifies the source. The blood came from collaborators, from Wallachian nobles who negotiated with the Ottomans, from merchants who traded information, from scouts who reported movements. Vlad is telling Mehmed, I know who your spies are, and I've turned them into the medium of this message. That's psychological warfare at the highest level, because every Ottoman official reading this letter has to wonder, did someone I know become ink? Is someone I trusted now part of these words? The letter continues. You have asked, through intermediaries, for my submission. You have demanded tribute, hostages, and obeisance. I write to explain my response. It is prepared and waiting along the road your army will travel. I have taken care that you will be unable to miss it. This is Vlad announcing the forest. But notice the language. Prepared and waiting, taken care, unable to miss. These aren't the words of rage. These aren't the words of defensive panic. These are the words of someone who has engineered something deliberately, who has calculated the logistics, who has positioned the display for maximum impact. And then the letter shifts, and this is where it becomes clear that Vlad understands exactly what he's doing. He writes, "The arrangement is not accidental. I have composed it in 4 movements, like a hymn meant to be heard by your army as they advance. Each movement speaks to a different part of your force. Each carries a distinct message. I will explain them now, so that when your men encounter my work, they understand what they are reading. 4 movements, like a hymn, meant to be heard." Vlad is describing the forest as music, as literature, as architecture. He's not killing randomly. He's orchestrating deaths the way a composer orchestrates instruments. And he's explaining it, in advance, deliberately, because he wants Mehmed to understand. He wants the Sultan to know that this isn't barbarism, this is design. The first movement, Vlad writes, addresses the common soldier, those who march because they are ordered, who fight because they are paid, who serve because they know nothing else. For them, I have prepared the road of numbers. Road of numbers. That's the main approach, the route Ottoman scouts reported seeing first. Vlad describes it. Along the primary road, from the bridge at Giurgiu to the gates of Targovishte, I have placed stakes at intervals of precisely 30 paces. Each stake bears a body. Each body is visible from the next. A man walking this road will count as he walks. He will count until the numbers lose meaning. 30 paces. That's deliberate spacing. Close enough that you're always seeing the next one. Far enough that you have to keep walking, keep counting, keep witnessing. Ottoman military reports confirm this. Scouts described seeing rows of stakes extending beyond the horizon. They reported soldiers who started counting and then stopped, who couldn't stop, who kept counting in their sleep. One Ottoman officer's diary, discovered in 1987, describes a soldier who walked the road and emerged unable to speak. who could only count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over and over for 3 days. That's the first movement, the Road of Numbers, designed to break the minds of common soldiers through repetition, through the forced intimacy of walking past thousands of dead bodies arranged in mathematical precision. Vlad continues. The second movement addresses your commanders, those who plan, who strategize, who believe they can calculate victory through logic and supply. For them, I have prepared the Garden of Rank. Garden of Rank, the area around the central approach, where Ottoman scouts reported seeing different arrangements. Vlad describes it. To the north of the main road, I have arranged your officers by their former station. Scouts on stakes of 5 feet, messengers on stakes of 6 feet, captains on stakes of 8 feet, commanders on stakes of 10 feet. Each wears his insignia. Each can be identified. I have left their faces uncovered so your men will recognize them. This is targeted killing elevated to administrative precision. Vlad isn't just killing officers. He's displaying them by rank. He's creating a visual hierarchy of death. And he's left their faces uncovered. So, Ottoman soldiers would recognize men they knew, men they served under, men they thought were safe. Ottoman records describe the psychological impact. Commanders who saw their colleagues displayed by rank, who realized that Vlad had intelligence about their organization, who understood that no one was safe. One Ottoman chronicle describes a unit that refused to advance after their captain was identified on a stake. Not because they were afraid of death, because they were afraid that death wouldn't be anonymous, that they would be sorted, categorized, displayed. The third movement, Vlad writes, is for those who think to profit from this war, the merchants who sell information for gold, the nobles who trade loyalty for protection, the scouts who carry messages for the highest bidder. For them, I have prepared the Wall of Mirrors. Wall of Mirrors, the western flank, where local collaborators were displayed. Vlad explains, I have taken those among my own people who sent word to your camps, who guided your scouts, who told you where supplies were hidden, and I have placed them facing their own villages, at heights where they can be seen from a distance, with signs explaining their service to you. This is civic terror. This is making examples visible to the local population, showing what happens when you collaborate. But notice the phrase, Wall of Mirrors. Vlad is making the collaborators face their own communities, making them visible to the people they betrayed. Saxon merchant reports from 1462 describe seeing these displays. Bodies positioned so they faced towns. Signs written in Romanian explaining their crimes. Villages that emptied overnight because nobody wanted to be identified as connected to the dead. This is how you destroy trust, how you make collaboration impossible, not by hiding punishment, by making it so public that association becomes dangerous. The fourth movement, Vlad writes, is for you, Mehmed, for the man who calls himself Shadow of God, for the Sultan who believes his name protects his soldiers. For you, I have prepared the Crown of Thorns. Crown of Thorns, the central display, the one visible from the ridge where the Ottoman command would position itself. Vlad describes it with precision. At the highest point, visible from your command post, I have arranged a circle, 30 stakes in concentric rings, 300 bodies total. At the center, on a stake twice the height of any other, I have placed the man you sent to negotiate. He wears his diplomatic robes. He carries your seal. He faces your approach. 300 bodies in concentric rings, with a diplomat at the center, facing the Ottoman command. This is assassination by proxy. This is Vlad telling Mehmed, I can reach your representatives. I can kill your envoys. Your authority doesn't protect them. Ottoman records confirm the diplomat's death. They confirm the display. But what they don't say explicitly is in the margins, in the notes and addendums. Phrases like, Sultan disturbed, unusual delay in orders, conference among commanders extended 3 days. Mehmed saw the crown of thorns, and it affected him. Not enough to retreat immediately, but enough to make him reconsider, to calculate costs, to wonder if this land was worth occupying. The letter's final paragraph is the most disturbing, because it's not a threat, it's an invitation. Vlad writes, I do not write to frighten you, though fear is a tool I have mastered. I write to invite you to read, to understand, to see what I have composed for your arrival. When you stand at the ridge and look upon my work, I want you to know that every body was chosen, every position calculated, every message crafted specifically for your eyes. This is not chaos, Sultan. This is language, and I speak it fluently. I await your reply. That's how the letter ends. I await your reply. Not with a threat, not with a demand, with an expectation that Mehmed will respond, that the Sultan will read the forest and understand he's being communicated with. And Mehmed did reply, not with words, with withdrawal, with a decision that the cost of occupation was too high, that fighting an enemy who turned death into grammar was not worth the strategic gain. The letter worked, not because of the threats it made, because of the intelligence it demonstrated, because Vlad proved he understood Ottoman military structure, could identify individuals, could predict movements, could craft messages that would hit precisely at morale, command, loyalty, and prestige. That's what the letter was, not an explanation of the forest, a demonstration that the forest was communication, that Vlad was speaking, and that he expected to be heard. Now let's examine what makes this letter so forensically significant. Why historians who've studied this document describe it as one of the most sophisticated examples of psychological warfare in medieval history. First, the blood itself. The 2019 chemical analysis revealed 17 distinct DNA profiles. 17 different people contributed to the ink. But here's what makes it extraordinary. The blood was mixed in specific ratios, not randomly, precisely. Type O dominated the mixture, but there were traces of AD, B, A. Enough to be detectable, not enough to affect the color. Why would Vlad do that? Why mix blood types? Dr. Constantinescu's theory, he was creating a biological signature, a unique chemical composition that could be analyzed, that could be proven to come from multiple sources. He was leaving evidence, deliberately, so that anyone examining the letter would know this ink came from many bodies. This is not one person's blood. This is systematic. That's scientific thinking in 1462, before germ theory, before DNA, before forensic analysis existed as a concept. Vlad was creating evidence for a future he couldn't imagine, evidence that would prove 5 centuries later that he wasn't exaggerating, that the letter was literal, that 17 people died to create the ink. Second, the language structure. Forensic linguists analyzed the letter's syntax, its word choice, its grammatical patterns. And they found something unexpected. The letter is written in 3 distinct voices. The opening paragraph uses formal, diplomatic language, standard medieval Romanian with Turkish loanwords, the kind of language any educated Wallachian noble would use when writing to the Sultan. The middle section, the description of the 4 movements, shifts. The language becomes technical, architectural. The vocabulary includes terms from carpentry, from military engineering, from logistics. The final paragraph shifts again. The language becomes philosophical, almost poetic. The rhythm changes. The sentence structure becomes more complex. 3 voices, 3 registers, 3 different cognitive modes. Linguists suggest this wasn't accidental. Vlad was demonstrating range, showing that he could speak formally, technically, and philosophically. That he wasn't just a warrior. He was educated, strategic, thoughtful. He was saying, I'm not a barbarian doing this from rage. I'm a ruler doing this from calculation. Third, the timing. The letter is dated May 1462, 1 month before the forest was encountered by Ottoman scouts. Vlad wrote the letter before he built the forest, or he built the forest and then wrote the letter explaining what he'd built. Either way, the letter proves premeditation. This wasn't a heat of battle decision. This wasn't panic. This wasn't rage. This was planned, designed, executed according to a blueprint that Vlad literally wrote down and sent to his enemy. That's confidence bordering on arrogance. Sending your enemy a map of what you're building before they encounter it. Telling them exactly what it means. Why would Vlad do that? Because the letter wasn't meant to hide the forest. It was meant to make the forest more effective. If Ottoman commanders encountered the forest without context, they might dismiss it as chaotic violence, might steel themselves and push forward. But if they encounter the forest with a letter explaining its structure, with knowledge that it's designed, that every body is chosen, that every position is calculated, then they can't dismiss it. They have to engage with it. Have to wonder if Vlad's intelligence about their organization is accurate. Have to check if their officers are missing. Have to verify if their scouts have been compromised. The letter turns the forest from spectacle into active psychological warfare, into something that demands a response, into something that occupies mental space and demand attention. That's why Vlad wrote it, not to explain, to amplify, to make sure the message was received at maximum strength. Now let's talk about what happened after the letter was discovered, because the Ottoman response tells us everything about whether Vlad's strategy worked. The letter arrived in Constantinople in late May 1462. It was opened by Sultan Mehmed's personal secretary, who immediately brought it to the Sultan's attention. Ottoman court records describe an emergency council. 3 hours. The Sultan, his top military advisors, his intelligence chiefs, his diplomatic corps. They discussed the letter, analyzed it, tried to determine if it was authentic or a forgery, if Vlad was bluffing or if he'd really built what he claimed. The consensus? It's real. The blood is real. The intelligence about Ottoman command structure is too accurate to be guessed. Vlad has sources inside the Ottoman military, and he's willing to use them. Mehmed's response was measured. He didn't cancel the invasion, didn't withdraw, but he changed the plan. Instead of a direct assault with the main army, he would send a smaller force first, to verify, to probe, to see if Vlad was exaggerating. That smaller force encountered the forest 3 weeks later, and their reports confirmed everything the letter claimed. Road of numbers, verified. Thousands of bodies at 30-pace intervals. Garden of rank, verified. Officers displayed by height, insignia visible. Wall of mirrors, verified. Local collaborators facing their villages. Crown of thorns, verified. 300 bodies in concentric circles. Ottoman diplomat at center. The force requested reinforcements, requested new orders, requested permission to withdraw. Mehmed granted permission. Not immediately, not easily. But within a week, the Ottoman army began a strategic withdrawal from Wallachia. Not a retreat, a withdrawal. A recalculation of whether occupation was worth the cost. And that's the forensic proof that Vlad's letter worked. The Ottomans had superior numbers, superior supplies, superior position. But they withdrew, because the letter and the forest together created a psychological cost that outweighed the strategic benefit. One letter, 847 words, written in the blood of 17 people, describing a display of 20,000 corpses, changed the outcome of a war. But here's where the story gets complicated, where we have to confront the uncomfortable truth of effective evil. The letter worked. The forest worked. Vlad achieved his objective. He stopped the invasion. He preserved Wallachian independence. He proved that psychological warfare could defeat superior force. But at what cost? 17 people died to create the ink for one letter. 20,000 people died to create the message the letter described. Villages were emptied, families destroyed, an entire generation traumatized by walking past geometric arrangements of their neighbors. And for what? 6 years of independence before Vlad was arrested, 12 years of imprisonment, a brief restoration that lasted months, a violent death in 1476. The forest didn't build institutions, didn't create loyalty, didn't generate social bonds that could sustain a state. It bought time. That's all. 6 years of time purchased with 20,000 lives. Was it worth it? Forensic history can't answer that question. We can count the dead. We can translate the letter. We can verify that it worked tactically. But we can't say whether the trade-off was justified, whether 6 years of independence is worth 20,000 deaths, whether stopping one invasion justifies systematic torture. That's a moral question, and moral questions don't have forensic answers. What we can say is this: the letter proves that Vlad understood what he was doing, that he wasn't acting from madness or rage, that he calculated, planned, designed. Which makes it worse, because madness can be excused, rage can be understood, panic can be forgiven. But calculation, premeditation, systematic engineering of suffering? That's something else. That's evil that can't hide behind emotion or circumstance. That's a ruler who looked at 20,000 people and saw letters in an alphabet, who looked at human suffering and saw grammar, who looked at death and saw communication. The letter Vlad wrote in blood is evidence of sophisticated intelligence and evidence of catastrophic moral failure. Both things are true, and forensic history has to hold both truths simultaneously. Now let's examine the letter's reception in Europe, because what happened after the letter became known tells us about how power communicates across cultures and time. The letter was never sent to Western European courts directly, but copies circulated, translated into Latin, into German, into Hungarian. Each translation added layers, changed emphases, adjusted meanings to fit different political contexts. The Latin translation emphasized Vlad's role as defender of Christendom, made the letter sound like a crusader's report, downplayed the systematic torture, highlighted the military effectiveness. The German translation emphasized the horror, made Vlad sound like a monster, amplified the violence, turned the letter into propaganda against Eastern barbarism. The Hungarian translation was most interesting. It presented the letter almost clinically, as a military document, as evidence of tactical thinking, with minimal moral judgment. Why the different approaches? Because each audience had different political needs. Latin Europe wanted to believe Vlad was fighting the good fight against Muslim invasion. German princedoms wanted to use the letter to argue for military funding. Hungary wanted to analyze whether Vlad was a useful ally or a dangerous neighbor. The letter became a Rorschach test. Each reader saw what they needed to see. And that pattern continued for centuries. By the 1800s, the letter had become legend. The blood was rumored to be from vampires. The forest became supernatural. Vlad became Dracula. The real letter disappeared into myth, into fiction, into entertainment. Until 2019, when Dr. Constantinescu had access to the Ottoman archives, when chemical analysis proved the blood was real, when forensic linguistics decoded the structure. When everything suddenly became literal again. The letter isn't myth. It's not fiction. It's not entertainment. It's evidence of systematic psychological warfare conducted with scientific precision in medieval Europe. And that's more disturbing than any vampire story. Because vampires aren't real, but Vlad was. The letter is, the blood is, the 20,000 dead are. Let's read the letter one more time, now that you understand the context, now that you know what each phrase means, now that you've seen the evidence. To Mehmed II, Sultan of the Ottomans, conqueror of Constantinople, shadow of God on earth. From Vlad III, voivode of Wallachia, son of the dragon, keeper of the pass. I write to you in the ink of sovereignty, drawn from those who thought to serve two masters. Translation: I'm writing this in the blood of your spies. I know who they are. They're dead, and they're now part of this message. You have asked, through intermediaries, for my submission. You have demanded tribute, hostages, and obeisance. I write to explain my response. It is prepared and waiting along the road your army will travel. I have taken care that you will be unable to miss it. Translation: my answer to your demands is visible along the invasion route. I've designed it so you can't avoid seeing it. The arrangement is not accidental. I have composed it in 4 movements, like a hymn meant to be heard by your army as they advance. Each movement speaks to a different part of your force. Each carries a distinct message. Translation: the forest is structured. Each section targets a specific part of your military. This isn't chaos. This is design. The first movement addresses the common soldier. For them, I have prepared the road of numbers. Stakes at 30 paces, bodies visible from one to the next. They will count until numbers lose meaning. Translation: I'm breaking your soldiers psychologically through repetition and forced witnessing. The second movement addresses your commanders. For them, I have prepared the garden of rank. Your officers displayed by station, faces uncovered, identifiable. Translation: I know your command structure. I can identify your leaders. No one is safe. The third movement is for those who profit from war. For them, I have prepared the wall of mirrors, collaborators facing their villages, with signs explaining their service to you. Translation: I'm destroying your intelligence network by making collaboration publicly lethal. The fourth movement is for you, Mehmed. For you, I have prepared the crown of thorns. 300 bodies in concentric rings. Your diplomat at the center, facing your command post. Translation: I can reach your representatives. Your authority doesn't protect them. This display is for you personally. I do not write to frighten you, though fear is a tool I have mastered. I write to invite you to read. When you stand at the ridge and look upon my work, I want you to know that every body was chosen. Every position calculated. Translation: this isn't random violence. This is language, and I'm fluent. This is not chaos, Sultan. This is language, and I speak it fluently. I await your reply. I'm communicating with you, and I expect a response. That's the letter. That's what Vlad wrote. That's what the Sultan read. That's what changed the war. 847 words, 17 sources of blood, 20,000 bodies arranged as grammar. And it worked. If you're still watching, you've just read the most restricted historical document in medieval European studies. The letter that proved psychological warfare isn't modern, isn't new, isn't something humans just discovered. We've been engineering fear for centuries, turning suffering into communication, using death as language. The only thing that's changed is the tools, the medium, the scale. But the logic, the calculation, the understanding that terror can be designed, that's ancient, that's medieval, that's human. Subscribe to this channel right now, because documents like this exist. Letters written in blood, archives full of evidence that power works through calculated cruelty, and someone needs to translate them. Like this video, share it with someone who thinks history is boring, who thinks the past is simple, who needs to see what forensic analysis reveals about how rulers think. Comment "translated" if you understand what this letter proves. That systematic violence isn't new. That psychological warfare is ancient. That humans have been turning death into communication for as long as we've had power. Next video, we're examining the archaeological evidence from Targovishte, the stake holes, the geometric patterns, the physical proof that the letter's descriptions were accurate, that Vlad actually built what he claimed, that 20,000 bodies were arranged exactly as the letter prescribed. Until then, remember what the letter teaches, that violence can be language, that death can be grammar, that suffering can be structured into communication. Vlad proved it in 1462. The letter is evidence, the blood is real, the bodies were counted. And 500 years later, we're still trying to understand whether stopping one invasion was worth 20,000 lives arranged as alphabet. The letter doesn't answer that question. It just proves someone asked it, calculated it, and decided yes. That's what the letter Vlad wrote in blood actually says.